Hello, today is Tuesday, September 10th, 2019. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle call. I am going to share my screen, hopefully. Hopefully folks can see my screen.
Looks good.
Great. If you could add your details to the meeting minutes, that would be helpful. Follow up from action items from last time. Ooh, I did not do my due diligence. I knew there were a couple. Let's take a look here. Server says not much. One thing I wanted to do too, before we do the updates, is PSAs. Everyone who submitted a maintainers track talk should have gotten an email. So I submitted all of those talks. So I do know that some folks have gotten their emails, but if you haven't gotten yours and you requested me to submit the maintainers track talk, please let me know, and I will try it for KubeCon North America. Please let me know, and I'll try to follow up there. The second thing is that there is, during the Contributor Summit, we may or may not have a session for face-to-face talks. I will PSA once I find out more details. I do know that I submitted a request to have a face-to-face session during the Contributor Summit, but I do not know what the current state is from the Contributor Summit. So that's an action item for me to do.
Jason and I submitted for Cluster API, and when we were looking at it, there was a timeline of dates for when the announcements would go out. I don't remember off the top of my head when it was, though.
Does anyone have a link to the Contributor Summit?
Yeah, we should get that in there too.
Struggling to Google it.
It will take a bit. Give me a second here.
Yeah, I still haven't signed up for the Contributor Summit, so I need to do that.
Post that in chat.
Thanks, Vince. Perfect. I can put that in the doc.
Thank you.
Yep.
Everyone beat me. Are there any other PSAs or things folks wanted to talk about before we get into the sub-project updates? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, let's start going through the list. Cluster API. Who wants to do the update?
I can do it.
You got it, Andy?
Sure. So we had lots of releases this past Friday. They are all related to the V1 Alpha 2 API version for Cluster API. So all of the versions are listed in the document there, and we do have a new quick start with details on how to get up and running as quickly as possible right now with AWS and vSphere. And as we get additional quick starts for the other providers, we can do pull requests to the Cluster API documentation for that. And I think that's all for the main portion of this. Any questions on the Alpha 2 release of Cluster API? All right, over to you, Vince.
I have a PR up for GCP V1 Alpha 2. This is a large rewrite of like what we had in V1 Alpha 1. There is also like another PR to get some more permissions mostly to create the release 01 branch for the code that's in there today. And I mostly wanted to poke Justin today to see like his feedback and
you have the org permissions should be merging momentarily. I have not made it through the other PR quite yet. The 1.3 million lines of code to read through. Although I guess if we just cut the release branch, I will read through the non-vendor changes, and then I think
the commits are split, so it should be easier to go through. But it's a large rewrite. I couldn't salvage any code like from the V1 Alpha 1 because
I was debating whether I should just like read it like from clean and treat it like a new provider, which is more or less what it is, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So yeah, if we have release 0.1, then I think we're good to go, and you should have permission to do that, or I can do it, but we can talk on chat, on Slack or whatever.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So part of this effort is kind of like the broader enablement that I'd like to do in the future, especially in the 117 timeframe, is to kind of go back up to the long-standing items list. So retire din, that's done. Format, text, strike through, of removing the cluster directory. And using the GCP provider, because I know Google has a bunch of tests that is very specific to Google, to test things like graphics card integration, the scale tests are all done at Google, all the other stuff tests are done at Google. And ideally, we'd like to enable the GCP provider to just be the replacement for KubeUp over time. Do you have thoughts there, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I think kudos to you all for doing this. I think that's great. I think there was a question about like, would we want to do it on AWS if we could? And I don't think we have any objection to doing that, other than we don't necessarily have as many credits on AWS, and it will probably be more work to port it to AWS. So I think getting it working on GCP is a great tactical choice. It will probably take, and I think we don't want to lose coverage of important scenarios. But otherwise, I think there are some unimportant scenarios, and I agree with you. It will take time to do that, but you know, it would be great to have GPU support tested, and not just on GCP, but on GCP and AWS or whatever else anyone wants to submit. But yeah, it would be great to get this going.
Do you know if Google is going to have any resources at all to help with this, or is it going to be kind of like, you know, what I'm kind of looking for is some cohort who can at least review the PRs that are going to go into /cluster. Are you the owner of that now, since Robbie is gone?
I probably am technically the owner. Are we going to put PRs into /cluster or just remove? I mean, I'm happy to remove. There will be many people lining up to review deletion PRs. I don't think Google is going to object to removing that code. I don't think we reference it any longer in GKE, for example. And if we do, we would fix it. I guess the question is, are we going to put more stuff into cluster, or where are we going to build these up?
That's a good question. We need to evaluate where we can do it. I think first step is enumerate what's all there, because there's a bunch of tests that exist, and I don't think everybody has a shared understanding of what's required, what's needed, and what's detritus. And yes, that's the actual way you pronounce that. I've been reprimanded by my wife several times. So I used to always say detritus. First step is enumerate. Second step is to build up the corpus and make sure that GCP provider has parity. Because I do know for things like the scale tests, we're going to need to have some solution for auto-scaling groups. I don't see how we could get around it. Otherwise, it might take eternity for us to be able to spin up that many nodes. I do know that the current scale tests take on the order of 11 hours, but I don't know if that's because of some scale factor in pushing out machines and getting them updated. That's a TBD item.
I'd be very interested in figuring out that one as well. Like, that would be very interesting. Because my theory is that if we crank up the concurrency, we can actually go as fast as makes or auto-scaling groups.
That might be possible too, right? Like, we might have to look into that, but I think we'll start to enumerate the tests, figure out the requirements, push those features in the GCP provider where necessary, and build up the corpus of tests and figure out how we can deprecate the existing ones.
Can I make a suggestion, which is that we also get one basic one going as quickly as possible, just so that when people are building more, they build them in where we want them to be building them, rather than continuing to add them to cluster, which is sort of what would probably happen today.
Yes, I agree. So there is a separate issue, which I'll have to link into this area that is related to that, or I'll probably put it up on top. I do know that we started to enumerate our action plan up above, but we'll have to link that PR. So Lumir, if you have it, if you can put it here on the top, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I also realized that CubeUp is currently used for SIG Windows testing. So they use CubeUp to deploy Windows workers.
Depending upon where we're at with kubeadm in 117 timeframe, we might be able to help them.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, enumerating the state space is order 1.
Okay.
Next thing was V1 Alpha 3 prioritization and planning. Does anyone want to give a PSA there?
Yeah, so we are going to be meeting in San Francisco for a face-to-face to do planning for Cluster API V1 Alpha 3. And hopefully the outcome of that will be our P0 and P1 items that we plan to work on in V1 Alpha 3, as well as ideally a tentative release timeline and schedule as well.
Any questions for Cluster API? If not, Lubomir, or I don't know. I don't see Fabrizio, so it's Lubomir.
Yeah, we are in kubeadm is pretty good shape for 116. We are waiting for the release. The only major feature we are at is the customization of static pod manifest, which is going to be alpha in 116. Something else is that we updated the documentation and testing for 116. This is ready. Fabrizio started working on a kit for the kubeadm operator. Brief summary is the kubeadm operator is going to allow you to execute sequences of events on different nodes. The KIP is work in progress over HackMD. You can have a look at that. And I had a question at the end, like, do we want to do the planning for 117 for kubeadm this week or next one?
I don't have a preference. I actually do have a slight preference, but I would defer to those who are doing most of the work. Maybe you could ask with the folks on the office hours and see what their preference is.
Yeah, it seems that Fabrizio and Rosti are mostly busy this week, but I'm AFK next week. I'm going to suggest that you guys do the planning next week.
That seems fair. If you want to do pre-planning inside the doc, I highly recommend, just for transparency, getting all your ideas and thoughts for a plan into doc form before they get in there.
Okay, I'm going to do that.
So for planning, who have not been through sort of like a kubeadm style planning session, I highly recommend you go to it, even if you're just a bystander. Like, we have a modus operandi that has worked across several cycles because kubeadm is time boxed to to the Kubernetes release. It forces ourselves to make tough choices and it forces people to actually stand up and be accounted for. Yeah. So that way, the explicit prioritization comes from people who'll be doing the work, right? So I think that would probably be beneficial for other folks to see. Are there any questions, comments, complaints, concerns there? Next up, Thomas, Minikube.
Sure. So we've got a release next Monday to be simultaneous with Kubernetes 116. There's been, now that we have the new docs site, there's a project in order for deduplicating the documentation between the main Kubernetes website and our own. So basically, there should only be one source of truth when it comes to like how do you install Minikube, and so we've done some discussions with the docs folks on which docs stay and which ones go. So we've started discussing the 2020 roadmap for Minikube. Some of the more interesting things are ideas that have been floated is a menu bar UI for macOS and Windows, similar to like Docker for desktop, where you can stop and start Kubernetes clusters. but supporting resource exhaustion notifications, like when your VM is run out of memory, for instance, that you can't, or you've got then crash loop back off. We've started discussing the add-ons feature. We don't actually have any design on the table yet for this, but it's long in the tooth. One of the things we want to make sure is that if you deploy if you deploy a service with this tool, like say Jenkins X, that it scales up the CPU and memory appropriately. And then suspend and resume, that'll actually be important for the menu bar UI. So yeah, no actual proposals on the table yet for any of these. It's just brainstorming at this point. So yeah. Any questions about those items?
Just a real quick question with regards to test integration with other projects too. Can you today spin multiple Minikube clusters up at any moment in time?
Yes, we do our tests in parallel, our integration tests.
Yeah, on a single host, yeah.
Right.
Right. So the question I kind of have is that there's currently a Kubernetes in Docker or kind-ish cluster API provider, which allows folks to declaratively manage, multiple clusters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether or not there's demand for it, but I would use it personally if there was a cluster API provider for Minikube.
My understanding was that there once upon a time was. I haven't actually checked the state of it. I'll have to check. I remember Robert Bailey mentioning something about this a long time ago. I'll check on that.
The only reason is like kind is great up to a point where I want to do like real load testing with like real load balancers and stuff, because then it gets a little bit funky.
Right.
Like I can use kind for like 90% of what I want to do.
Exactly.
That last 10% is rough going.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. Let me look into that, and I'll have something to report for the next meeting.
Cool.
So one of the other things, a follow-up from something I mentioned a couple of weeks ago about triage tooling. So I started getting annoyed about lack of options for triage tooling. So I went ahead and wrote a tool. You can click on the example there. I'm working on getting approvals to open source it. One of the, I guess, some of the interesting things about this tool is that it tracks conversational state. So you can see which issues have been updated by, say, the author of the issue, and have like a certain tag. Like that second box is things that, presumably anyways, things that have a tag of needs information, but the author has actually followed up since it was tagged.
Yeah.
So we have things like that, basically trying to codify what our long triage document is into something that people can use. And one of the other features on that is there's a multiplayer mode for the triage, where if you have a meeting where you're trying to triage a large amount of items, like for instance, doing a quarterly review of all of your open items, that you can shard it across all the people who are participating. So we've actually been doing that for our weekly triage for a couple of weeks now.
One question I might have, or feature request, depending upon your answer, would be multi-repository support.
It's built in already. Sweet,
you're my hero.
So that, like, for instance, I need to track Minikube issues on the Kubernetes website. And so this allows me to tie those in,
So I think if we get the standard cluster lifecycle face-to-face session, I would love to present something like this during the contributor summit.
Okay. Well,
you have time?
I should have it open source by then. I'm working through the corporate motions now. So.
Very cool. This would be highly beneficial, I think, to everyone who does this all the time. Yep. God only knows my inbox is a steaming disaster of GitHub notifications.
I've given up on my inbox.
Yeah, you're not alone. Are there any other questions there? I think this is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. All right. Next up, add-ons. Lee?
Yeah, just a small update on this is that we have WIP for the add-on installer Kubernetes integration, and we will be putting together a PEP tomorrow morning for probably the 117 cycle to include that as an alpha feature. Of course, with continuing volumes of discussion for how it should look. And then Justin continues to report progress on Kube Builder and the details of implementing add-on operators in a simpler fashion using the scaffolding available through the project. Then regarding component config, I actually don't really have updates specifically about that working group. We did start a related project called GitOps Toolkit that does use Kubernetes API machinery, if anyone wants to take a look. But certainly room for a lot of interfaces to be consolidated into component base.
So you had that new contributor session for component config. Did you find it, was it worthwhile? Did you have like some stickiness there? Yes. What I'm trying to figure out is how to rally folks to these two causes in particular.
Yeah, with regard to add-ons, I think we need to get a base set up for people to be able to contribute. And then with component config, we did have a few contributors stick around. And I have somebody in my DMs right now who is chasing down some multi-doc support stuff. Alex might be on this call. But yeah, and then we had somebody who did legacy flag support for kubeproxy. I haven't been able to devote enough time to the component standard project or working group. But I can't speak for other people. That's my personal time management.
So I think the long tail of component config is very, very important to the health and longevity of the project. So the question I'd have is, if you need help managing there, because I know Lucas is going to college and you're having troubles with time, is Michael Taufin able to run the show there, or do you guys need more help with regards to sort of funneling and getting the ball rolling?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm gonna be honest, like the past few weeks have felt pretty business as usual, right? We've done some code walkthroughs and things like that, but as far as real work materializing, some of that's on me. But yeah, I can't speak for Mike's commitments and that kind of thing. But he does put in effort to make sure that we remain organized. So.
Okay. It might be worthwhile to do a planning session for the cycle to try and get committed.
Yeah.
Yeah, to try and get commitment.
Yeah. But yeah, with regard to the contributor session, that we actually did receive a lot of interest and people stuck around. So.
Okay. Any other questions with regards to component config? Going once, twice, 3 times. Cops, Justin.
Yeah. 2 highlights, I guess, is that the OpenStack support went beta. So congratulations and thank you to the people that are doing all the hard work on that. Beta basically means sort of a commitment to not break things too egregiously, too lightly. So that's a good step forwards. And the release train keeps on rolling, and we might even catch up by 116. Again, our goal is not to have the stable COPS release at the Kubernetes 1.0 release, but rather to have an alpha available at the 0.0 release. And if we don't quite have that in time, we're not going to be too far behind. So we've come down from about 180 days delay to about 0 days delay. So that is an improvement. other than that, just business as usual, I'd say.
Great. Any questions for Justin? Image builder, a couple of people might want to talk about this one. Vince, you have a comment there?
Yeah, we added support for building the Ubuntu copy images on GCE. There's the PR was already merged. There's a question around permissions, like because they're only building your own project, and it seems like you can really share with other, like with everybody. So I might have to sync up with one of the Googlers later, Justin or someone else, about this.
Is there any person that you'd recommend that might have time, Justin, to talk about this?
Definitely talk to me, I think, or talk to me and I can like see if anyone else does. I think you can just make them public. I don't think they'll appear for everyone, but you can make them public. Like they won't be listed by default.
Okay.
But I can confirm that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I put this item here just so for broader informant. There's been a longstanding PR and a set of patches that we've kind of weirdly maintained for CentOS, which have been fixing the Cloud Init package that exists there. Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the understanding is that CentOS 7.7 should contain the fix for Cloud Init for CentOS. So that way we no longer need to have this weird patch set library. Is that correct?
Yeah, it updates it to 18.5, which has the templating that we need.
So my plan currently is to cut a tag for, there's no actually build artifacts for the image builder, but to cut a tag. To cut a tag for V1 Alpha 2 based image support for that repo, just so we have some reference point to look at and to submit patches to if we want to. I would do that after 7.7 lands, which I don't have an ETA on other than it's supposed to be soon. Any questions there? Next up, is Daniel on? I don't see him here.
His notes said he can't attend.
I can speak about some of the stuff I participated in with Daniel. So we had a discussion, me, Fabrizio, and Daniel, only the three of us, about how we were going to integrate HCDADM with KubeADM. So there's a video recording of the meeting, and also we have a document that with the original proposal that me and Fabrizio created. I don't have context on the PR that is adjusting these priorities, but the other PR is probably about how HCD-ADM has to eventually support static pods, deploying HCDs as static pod. Currently it only supports systemd. And also me and Daniel had a private meeting discussing like how are we going to do end-to-end tests for HCD-ADM, and I explained some of the aspects that we should know about related to PRAO and test infra changes. So that's all I know about related to this update.
Any questions for Lubomir? Last but not least, hopefully Madimo could join us.
Yeah, I'm here.
Want to talk about Kubespray?
Yeah, it's been a while. We've been asked to have a check-in. We're part of the SIG, but not many of the members who contribute to Kubespray contribute to other areas of SIG cluster lifecycle, which happens. Kubespray is a big consumer of KubeADM and many other components, of course. One big update is that we're ready for Kubernetes 1.16. It's amazing. Losing the API deprecation, of course, is always fun. A lot of string replacements. Everyone's probably already done that on their side. Some cool new functionality is we've added the Calico native Kubernetes annotation support, and rewrote the route reflector logic so you can, add route reflectors or disable route reflecting or whatever. It was kind of a bunch of ugly YAMLs and bash commands, but now it's kind of more native YAML. Quite some time ago, we improved containerd cryo support for kubeadm deploying with etcd. Nothing too impressive for this crowd, though. Yeah, that's it.
Any questions at all for Matt?
I have a quick question. At some point in time, we discussed creating a kubespray deployer for kube tests. Did you guys drop this idea?
We don't have any Go developers that are on our side that are willing to write such a test. But so it looks like an external test is probably the best route. But we haven't spent any serious time looking into that.
Okay, let's see.
The intent would be to potentially have kubespray as a release, not right away, but eventually as a release blocking job for part of the Kubernetes release, so that way you could verify that everything's working on your end all the way through. I do know that there's a large swath of folks that use it, so.
I can see the desire. Okay, so I should get back in touch with the release folks who helped me last time find out about this.
Are there any other questions, comments with regards to a lot of the stuff we talked about? I do know that Ben is on the call, and I've been, or he was in the call. Yeah, I see him there. And in the fullness of time, I'd love to see some programmatic API coverage or deduplication from the ability to spin A versus B versus in Minikube to kind of like unite the clans. I know I mentioned it many times. Have you had any thoughts on that at all?
Sorry, what exactly are you looking for?
So ideally, you'd want to be able to, if a person's wanting to do a test, and they want to be able to set up a test cluster, most of the parameters around the shape of the cluster are very similar. I'd say like 90% of the shape should be analogous between the two. But there'd be there'd be a set of parameters that are unique for A versus B, right? And deduplicating the ability to spin this in a programmatic fashion would be super beneficial for people who use both Minikube and Kind for test automation.
Yeah, so we're working on figuring that out right now. We've also got some experimentation with different backends. Since early in the project, we've had a lot of requests for Podman, for example, and we've actually found an unfortunate amount of things that are different depending on them. But we are, at least over in the Kind project, we are hoping to get to that state so that you can write a test harness that does this and you don't need to shell out to anything yourself. We have a bit of a ways to go on that.
Okay. That was my only comment there, I think. Otherwise, I think all the work you guys did this last year to automate a bunch of the tests between you, Lubomir, and Fabrizio to get that rolling in the main test infra has been amazing. It's been awesome. Thank you so much for that. Are there any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns? If not, we can actually get about 20 minutes of our time back. All right. Going once, twice, 3 times. Sold. 20 minutes back. Take care, everyone. Have a great Tuesday.
Bye-bye.